The climate change dilemma is not unlike that, and recognizing that we need to get beyond the politics of blame into what Mandela was a genius at creating in South Africa, which is the politics of truth and reconciliation. You have to find what you have in common. You have to be truthful about that, and you have to reconcile truthfully on the basis upon which the UN itself was created, the Charter was created, and many other things, not to mention all religions on Earth, that inherently all people have an equal right to be here and to, if you like, nature's resources, abundance, whatever. In contraction and convergence, that translates into, quote, quote, equal per capita entitlements of the contraction event that is required to stabilize the atmosphere. Equal entitlements to the contraction event that is required to stabilize the atmosphere. You can see there is an example of low per capita consumers, what we would call under-consumers, being allowed to rise up to the average, and over-consuming countries being required to fall to that per capita average, and then still under that same contraction arithmetic going down to zero. In this case, much too late. There are models on page 5 of all of this, which give you a little more detail about faster rates of contraction and convergence. Now, I'll stop there, but for one thing, I feel slightly ill at ease being in a session which is defined as population issues, not because I don't recognize that I am a person and part of a population, and there are population issues, and one of them is the growth and the exponential growth of population and all the rest of it. But I would say this: exponential growth of anything is a problem. It's, in a word, it's an explosion. You go from naught to infinity in a series of doublings. It's as simple as that. It's absolutely unavoidable. So the exponential growth of the economy is no less of a problem than the exponential growth of anything else, including pollution, production, consumption, and indeed population. Now, the last point is this. Thank you, Chair. It is to say that because contraction and convergence was the only, quote, quote, population-based climate policy model, conceptual framework saying equal per capita means every per capita who's there will be counted as an equal with potentially an equal share at convergence. Some people took to the argument that this was, quote, quote, a breeder's charter. To put it really crudely, I hate the argument, but it was flung at us. It was an incentive to Indian women to double the number of the babies that they had from 10 to 20 in order to breed permits for the Indian government. It's a completely outrageous and absurd suggestion. We made our feelings about that very clear. But we recognized that the argument was going to be made and it needed to be answered. So there is also within the model a function where you can, quote, quote, introduce a population base year in any year between 2000 and 2050. The stats in the model are UN stats for population at median fertility from 1995 only. It has the policy effect of this. If, for example, you place the population base year at, say, a convergence year of 2020, so populations, whatever they do after 2020, no longer, the model no longer recognizes any movement. If your population is still growing at that year, your entitlement will not grow proportional to your population. And conversely, if your population is actually contracting, if you have negative fertility, for example, as in, I think, France and Italy these days, your population, your credit would in fact slightly increase as the difference between your base year and your actual population. And the very last point to say is, that point made, the distribution internationally of permits to consume or emit emissions consequent on fossil fuel consumption in contraction and convergence, the pre-distribution, the distribution before the fact, not redistribution after the fact, the pre-distribution in the model is much, much more sensitive, obviously, to the rate of convergence than it is to the rate of population growth with or without the base year. That's my opening statement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, that begs the question, which I don't want you to answer now, but others may ask this. I mean, you know, why did contraction and convergence get lost? What needs to be done other than your tireless efforts to get it back into the political mainstream? And it also makes me realize that the establishment of the baseline year is a highly political thing, and I'd like to understand more about that, but not now. I don't think I think it's my duty as moderator to try and get us to answer the question about the linkage between population and climate change. I think a point that I failed to say in my opening remarks is that the case for population management exists without climate change. There are powerful arguments for promoting reproductive health and population management. Climate change clearly adds a degree of urgency to that, but they have validity anyway. Over to you, Ashok.
Thank you. May I borrow this? Sure. Thank you.
Can we watch from there?
Yes, of course.
I can watch from preview.
Thank you, Michael. I feel very happy having these three speakers before me because they've covered a lot of the basic premises that I was going to have to cover. Roger's made the case for the impossibility of a continuing growth on a finite resource base. This is something that the Club of Rome, of which I'm privileged to be co-president, had actually identified more than 40 years ago. What is Hugo going to do to me? Even nearer. All right. So this is not something new. We've been talking about it. The world was plastered with an explosive book called Limits to Growth, and we know that this is really a major issue. Sometimes it was misread, sometimes it was taken as a direct attack on people because of this population issue, but basically it's pretty obvious the mathematics doesn't work for continued exponential growth on a finite planet. Aubrey's brought up the whole question essentially of contraction and convergence. This really simply is the other side of the coin of equity and fairness. It's really simply saying that every single person on the planet, admittedly at some point in time, is entitled to the same rights as everyone else, which is what most civilizations in the world today subscribe to. The other thing that Michael raised was a question of the relationship between climate and people. Now, you're absolutely right. It's not contingent on climate. It doesn't have to do with climate. It does add urgency, climate issue. But what I'm going to try and share with you is something that I've been working on for the last few weeks because I'm really very concerned about the dead-end impasse we're heading for at Copenhagen, which was to look for ways in which these arguments from climate change actually create opportunities for this to happen. And I'm going to share with you some research that I'm really right in the middle of at the moment, and I'm going to try and do it as fast as I can, but you have to bear with me. Poverty and environment do go together. I mean, right now, the world is in a fair mess. There's the crisis of poverty, there's the crisis of environment. The two are totally related. And here's an example in this picture of people moving out of their homes. I work in this particular district in India, among others. This district in the center part of India, called Keating, has a total population of 1.2 million, and out of them, 700,000 have had to leave because the resource base just can't handle them. They've closed their homes, they've put thorns on their doors, and they're gone. There's a conveyor belt of bus services going to Delhi and to Bhopal, just taking people away. And this has been going on for several years now. And this is essentially, you can see from the state of the soil and the land there, the future fate of a very large part of the world. And if anybody says population is not a problem, I think they just have to go and visit one of these places. Now, what I'm really looking for, and there was the word convergence in my title, is what Michael is suggesting. How do we look at negotiations, international negotiations, as a means of bringing the views of the different parties into some kind of convergence so it's a win-win situation. So they can say, yes, this suits me, and everyone says, yes, this suits me. So I've been looking for that, and one of them is to do with population and climate change. It's about post-Kyoto, exactly what the title of this. So I don't feel quite as uncomfortable as you do, because I thought there is in this some very interesting possibilities. The people in the South say the North is to blame. South means poor, North means rich, There are plenty of rich people in the South, by the way, and I would classify them as North. I mean, they are basically a part of the same. Yes, indeed. So when we use these words, please understand that they're not geographical, they are not directional, they are a state of mind, and usually that state of mind is conditioned by one's income and wealth.